Hello and welcome back to Bad Teacher Podcast. Today's an exciting day for me. Episode 8. It's kind of like a lucky number I'm rocking with for many reasons right now, but also it's because we're going to have our first guest. So that's going to happen in about 15 minutes in. I'm going to get this introduction off my chest really quick, and then we will go into a little bit of some hot takes on North Carolina history just for continuing to educate ourselves, and then we will introduce our first guest to Bad Teacher Podcast. Super happy she can come through and chat with us. So, a federal fact that I wanted to share with you guys to start off with is some of the new numbers that have come out are so stark that we really just have to continue to disseminate this information. So, 1/10 of the top 1% have 25% of the wealth in this country. So I'm going to repeat that. This is 300,000 people in a nation of 330 million. So they get a quarter of all income. These 330,000 people, the top 1/10 of 1%, one quarter. If you take that out to 1%, together they own 50% of all stocks and shares of this country. So the richest one half own half. Then the rest of us, the 99%, have to fight over the other 50%. So when we are talking about austerity and we have to lower the budget because we don't have the money and we don't have the money and we don't have the money, well, they find money for military occupations, they find money to bomb, they find money to invade domestically in their own states and territories, like in Minnesota with ICE. They find money to go after protesters at Delaney Hall. They find money to build Alligator Alcatraz, which they now are shutting down, which is all cost money. I mean, this is all tax dollars. Not to mention the egregious crimes against humanities that happen at these places. And then we have the top 330, how many did I say? 300,000 people. Or not even, yeah, 300,000. Just, yeah. So money isn't the issue. The political allocation and the capitalist system is the issue. And so that's why we say tax the rich. Then we won't have these same type of budget negotiations, debates, well, what's better? Do we only kill 2% of the population? It's better than 5%, these type of nonsensical decisions that people feel like it's like normal to make. I wanted to now move on to some Iowa facts that I learned at a Mid-American Organizing Society, which is one organization I wanted to put on to people in Iowa. And Iowa CCI is another organization. If you guys are in Iowa, those are some good ones that do care about educators and education. But one of the pastors there by the way, I'm a by any means necessary person, so I believe in working with everybody. So I'm not saying that I'm particularly like super invested in the religious path to liberation. However, I do respect that path. And so the pastor was telling me that in Madrid, Iowa, where he is from, that 3 people died in 8 days because they couldn't access an ambulance. Likewise, the EMT is only funded in 27 of 99 counties in Iowa. So we need to be thinking about, Iowa currently ranking 44th in physicians per capita. There is a women's healthcare crisis. For example, Marshalltown, Iowa, a town of over 20,000 people, has no women's healthcare facilities. You can't have babies there. And then in the urban areas, or like in Iowa City, where I'm at, the maternal healthcare providers are overworked and overwhelmed by how many patients they have, and patients are oftentimes waiting 3 months to get in to an appointment. So yeah, that is Iowa. At the same time, Iowa is, cutting budgets for these type of services. They have Reynolds has made up a job for this dude. Let me show you. I can't make this up, you guys. Um, this dude right here, this dude, his name is Jacob Nicholson. It's funny because when I looked him up the other day when this news broke, he hadn't changed his job title yet, but he has done that. So we have our new chief efficiency officer at the Iowa Board of Regents, which oversees now using austerity tactics, much like Doge did to cut government funding. So this proposed to save, some over $1 million in higher education, which really is an attack on higher education because we don't have HR budgeting finance issues necessarily. Like that's not something that we needed. That's not something where the $200,000 salary needed to go. And like I said, this job was just made up last week. Previous to this, not unsurprisingly, he was the chief operating officer in the state of Iowa executive branch. So I'm not sure what type of merit beyond homie merit, nepotism-ish type merit that white people tend to obscure or conflate with. So nepotism is merit to a lot of ruling class people. But yeah, so he has this job. He got like a $40,000 raise. This chief operating was like 180 something. Now he's making over 200,000. Uh, so yeah, I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew his new job in Iowa. So this is at the same time that Iowa State has passed a law of a mandatory civics class, and they're trying to, hand place certain type of right-wing propaganda type history. Professors going after professors trying to replace, certain type of professors with conservative professors, banning books at the K through 12 level with Senate File 496, taking away human rights from the trans community in Iowa, first state to have taken the human rights of trans people away, and outlawing in schools and institutions the teaching of racism as systemic. And so we will continue to make these connections because I think that why am I saying all this? Because I want to paint the bigger picture. I think we get these news stories and they're all isolated. And so I'm trying to share that like it's not just a one angle type of attack. Like they're attacking from all different angles and they're attacking education. Another way that I wanted to share that they are attacking education is I wanted to look at some superintendent action going on in the news. So I wanted to start off with my hometown of Iowa City, Matt Degner. I'm going to put all the information in the chat in the description because I am here to just, you know, get it out there. You guys were making these connections. We're synthesizing the news in regards to not only education, but what affects our students and our teachers in education. Um, and so, and really all stakeholders. Um, and so I want to give you more information always. So I'm just going to do a really superficial run through of these superintendent things that have been popping up in the news that I'm interested in. Um, so Iowa City, Matt Degner has resigned as superintendent. However, he was appointed to like a curriculum coordinator in the district. So he stepped down because of community heat. Basically, that was, um, you know, demanding that he resign because of some mismanagement with $10 million. And again, I'm not going to go into all the details, but the long and short is, there was some missteps with money. HR wasn't doing audits, no financial reports for 2 years. The guy, again, nepotism is another through point here where he had no merit, but yet somehow he was, the CEO of human resources, et cetera. And so he has resigned. And we are also in a kind of a bluer area. So again, I'm not making any judgment calls on this. I'm just sharing the news because Los Angeles superintendent also resigned. And I wanted to share that story. So his name is Alberto Carvalho, and he comes from Miami, and he was hired in 2021 to lead the Los Angeles Unified School District, another like high blue 80% Democrat type area in the second largest school district in the nation. And this was so he resigns a couple months after FBI raided his home and office in connection with a criminal inquiry into districts dealing with an AI startup. So he is being accused of um, basically being tied to this company where he would get like a kickback or a bonus or, I scratch your back, you scratch mine with with a company that he hired. Um, and there's, a back and forth. Mr. Carvalho says in the New York Times, over the past 4 years, together we have made historic progress, gains that belong to our students, our educators, staff, and our communities. Placing students first has always guided my work, he wrote, because I believe our schools must remain focused on students and learning without distraction. I am resigning. Um, so they're going to, figure out what to do. But he's saying that that he has not done anything wrong. No evidence has been presented. But again, maybe just um, this attack on him for his political views. But on the other end of it, the company All Here tried to build an AI chatbot named Ed that was billed as an educational friend for students and that Carvalho claimed would democratize and transform education. All Here had won a competitive bidding process to build the chatbot. The Los Angeles District's Chief of Special Education, Anthony Aguilar, previously told New York Times. The district agreed to pay the company up to $6 million to develop the bot, a sliver of the district's $18 billion annual budget. Shortly after the deal was made, All Here collapsed financially in July 2024. Months later, its chief executive, Joanna Smith Griffin, was indicted on charges that she had defrauded investors. A longtime associate and friend of Mr. Carvalho's, Deborah Kerr, was a consultant for the company. Miss Kerr, who lived in Florida, met Mr. Carvalho while he was superintendent of the Miami-Dade Public Schools. Um, and the FBI has declined to comment on the case. So that happened. And then the superintendent of Des Moines Public Schools in Iowa, Ian Roberts, a migrant into the United States, he refused to ban books. So he refused to file Senate File 496. And then, not so surprisingly, a few months after that, he was indicted on immigration charges, which he says to this day that there was a technical glitch that provoked a further investigation, which has now turned into a smear campaign on his name. I don't know what to believe and what not to believe, so I will refrain from sharing what the propaganda has shared with us. But I want to keep following this information. He was just sentenced to 2 years in jail, and then he will be deported back to his home country. Of Guyana. Um, and then a thing that the news missed, so there was a lot of media attention on these things to one degree or another. The Waterloo, Iowa superintendent, also a blue area, from Waterloo, white man. Alberto was Portuguese, I think originally, again from Miami, but Jared Smith, current superintendent at Waterloo, he was the former North Tama superintendent, and he, along with South Tama, have settled an age discrimination lawsuit with three former employees for nearly 1.2 million out of court. And so just that didn't to me receive enough media attention. Again, making no judgment calls on this. I just want to stick to the truth. So I want to highlight when does the media get involved? When are there smear campaigns? When are there not? But we need to be tracking this information. I also know that, ironically, the the finalist was a African American woman, I think from Chicago. She was not chosen in the community. The district said that she was not chosen due to some sort of alleged corruption. I think also settled out of court. So again, just highlighting those contradictions there. So yeah, now let us transition into another. And next, I really do want to share some stuff going on in Cuba, but I think that I will not have time. So I'm going to go straight to some stuff I wanted to share about North Carolina and then introduce my first guest. So something that I learned from Dr. Blair Kelly was that on July 4th of 1865 in Raleigh, North Carolina, they celebrated, the African American community took over Raleigh streets and they celebrated the first July 4th that the formerly enslaved people were free. And so, as the story goes, the white people wouldn't even go out there. Oh my God, they're out in these streets, blah, blah, blah. And so I wanted to share this as a moment of joy in the African American community. And because my guest is coming from and teaching in North Carolina, I wanted to share a little bit of that history. And so again, this is not as a white person, I'll let the African American community figure out what does 4th of July look for them, but I do want to share how the history of the African American struggle has been celebrated, because June 19th is just one moment of emancipation, but really these emancipations were happening all over the United States at different dates, and they were being celebrated at that moment of when it happened. And so even like she said, August 1st was another one that kind of like that history has gotten lost, that August 1st was a day of emancipation in a lot of places. And maybe has turned into some sort of family reunions or family get-togethers, but that legacy is still there. And so I wanted to read to you the newspaper article that was posted in the Times of an eyewitness account of the joyous celebration. So this is from 1865. It was posted in New York Times. So almost incredible is the fact that a Northerner is quietly seated in the heart of a Southern state to describe a 4th of July celebration gotten up by those who have heretofore been held as slaves. Kilpatrick's flying squadrons and Sherman's triumphant legions tramped and rode through the streets of Raleigh in victorious review. But the great culmination of the victory was witnessed today, evidenced in the fact that the freedmen, women, and children of this vicinity, to the number of 3,000, celebrated the anniversary of American independence and marched to the city with banners flying, pennants streaming, and music playing as free and independent people. They go past the governor's house, they say. They've been waiting for, they've been preparing for this for 2 or 3 days. And then later on, the white citizens also had their celebration, and it was a decided success. They indulged in no procession, however, but merely assembled in the shady grove of the Capitol Square and listened to an exceedingly appropriate and well-written address by S.F. Phillips. There was an ordinary display of fireworks, and throughout the whole day, young America enjoyed, for the first time in 4 years, the inestimable privilege of throwing torpedoes, firecrackers, doubleheaders, big Dutchmen, etc. As to political significance, the blacks betrayed the most enthusiasm, of course, for it is their nature to be enthusiastic on such occasions, but the whites are deserving of no little praise for their liberality in donating money to defray the expenses and for the interest they betrayed in the sacred character of the day. Of course, always this move to innocence for white people. Not surprising at all. But anyways, that's the actual historical text that substantiates what I was just sharing with you guys. And now I will, I also wanted to mention that North Carolina is the second state for the amount of HBCUs, which is at 11. And I think it's Georgia that has the most at 14, if I'm not mistaken. But yes, it's Alabama, my bad. Alabama has 14 HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, whereas North Carolina has 11. And so there is a deep and profound African American presence and history and culture and legacy in this place. And so now I will introduce my guest and friend. She is a current third grade teacher in North Carolina. And again, I've grown up with her and I wanted her to share some of the things that she does to teach his true histories, considering identity, Goldie Muhammad's framework, right, of historically and culturally responsive pedagogy, centering on identity, skills, criticality, and intellectualism. So how does she center Black and Brown voices to teach history to her elementary students? And then just some stories that she has about education, politically, right? And so here she is, my friend and colleague, Amanda. All right, so now I am
Right.
honored to introduce my first guest of the show, Bad Teacher Podcast, and I will let her introduce herself.
Hello, I am Amanda. I am currently in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I teach third grade at a public elementary school.
Okay, thank you. And again, we went to school with each other, so she's from
Mhm.
good old Iowa and has lived there now for what, 20 years?
I've lived in North Carolina since 2012,
So a
so
while.
a long time.
14? Yeah, a
Longer,
long
yeah,
time.
yeah.
Okay. And so we had a conversation a few months ago when you were in town for some high school graduations here about how you approach history of North Carolina for your third grade students and how that approach is not only different and kind of innovative from the other teachers at school, but also what you had to do to be able to prepare yourself to be able to approach it centering the Black and Brown constituents or the Black and Brown people of North Carolina.
Yeah. So being a third grade teacher, that wasn't where I started. I started in first grade, um, then moved to second, and eventually got to third. And maybe we'll get through the rest of the elementary grades. But in order to teach it didn't come to the curriculum the way that it currently is until 3 years ago. So I teach in Wake County, which is one of the larger two counties in all of North Carolina. So there are thousands, 150,000 teachers, students, just all the things, right? So in my district, the way that it's broken down is it's broken down into areas because it's so large. And so that's one of the things to take into consideration is that like Wake County itself spreads very far. So you go from the heart of Raleigh all the way till you're getting to Creedmoor, which is more of like the country or starting to get into the country. So it's just all over, it's just a very, very large county, which comes with a lot of demographics of students and families, people in general. But the history of being here was not something that you are aware of until you are immersed in it. So I do live right near downtown Raleigh. When I first moved to North Carolina, I lived in North Raleigh. So coming from Waterloo to here was eye-opening because I interviewed coming here, not knowing anything about it. I student taught in a school right down the street from NC State University. So you're immersed in like the college life and the things like that. But you really, I mean, you're there for 8 weeks. So you're not really trying to learn the area or the history of it or anything like that. And so student teaching in fourth grade, at the time, I had a teacher who my supervisor born and raised here in Raleigh. So she kind of gave me a little bit of insight when we were reading in fourth grade at the time about the Tuscarora War and all of the native. It, there's a lot of streets here and a lot of communities that are named after indigenous people who took this area, who had control of this area at the time. And so it was like, huh, I never heard of this. And you just kind of teach it because you're like, I'm just trying to get through these 8 weeks. So then fast forward to interviewing for my first job, all of the things like that. It's like you don't really know what area you're going to be in, or what demographic your students are going to be. So I end up fortunately getting offered a job at the school I student taught at, but due to numbers and it shifts a lot here. And that's the thing is that you can, I bought my house in an area where I wanted the good schools, right? So come to find out there's a whole bunch of history around the neighborhood of which I bought my home for these good schools, that a lot of people don't know unless you go to the schools or teach in the area and you get to learn the history of it. And so for me, the approach was like, well, first I have to kind of know what I'm diving into. So it was just the self curiosity of wanting to educate myself for the sake of my students, because for me, I want to be the most knowledgeable, especially when I'm teaching young people who they might take the one thing that I say incorrectly and hang on to it. And then years come down the road and you don't even know that you said something that was incorrect and now it comes back. And so it's kind of just really wanting to make sure that the approach I take is not necessarily a general approach or like I'm excluding anything that could hurt people's feelings or offend anybody. It's more of like, what are just straight facts that are going to be able to maybe spark something that could have the reverse effect of, oh, I remember somebody who was important. And I do try to make an impact with my kids to where that, I'm the teacher they come back to, right? As future graduates, we just had our graduation walk the hallway and they come back. It's like I can still name every kid by face, name all the things, and they come back to see me. So it's like you are impressionable when you get those letters. So you want to make sure that you're saying and doing the right things for them. So I think to answer the question of just like my approach on how I do it is just I had to educate myself on the topics and they're ever changing. So you have to make sure that you're not willing or stuck in a way of, oh, well, this is how it was taught or this is how I'm going to teach it, and don't exclude anything regardless of what's in the content. It's there for a reason. And so that's kind of like the approach that I take for it, because I've seen some things happen with the content and omitting of things simply because of discomfort. So,
Can you think of a concrete example of that? Like either something that was omitted that you noticed that
mhm.
you decided to put into your lessons,
Yep.
or something that you just completely modified, like you just invented yourself?
Yeah. So I try not to over invent. I try to just put my own spin on things to keep it the way that it's put in there, just to cover all grounds, because it is
Mhm.
very touchy here, and there's a lot of power in things that are out of your control. And so that's one of the things is like you tread lightly, but you also tread with purpose. So for one of the things is, at the time I was teaching all of the subjects minus math when I first moved to third grade. And comes up for North Carolina history, right? So I was like, oh, okay, this is the first time I'm ever teaching this. So I had just moved to third grade and teaching it, just so happened to have a student teacher as well, which is perfect because then you're learning the content and diving in. The most important thing is to know the purpose behind every standard, but not just read what the standard said, read within the standard, read all the little sub things so that you're making sure that you hit it all. So we're going through it, and this is a planning day for all of us. So we all get together. I'm at a very fortunate school. So sometimes I will say you can get in this little bubble of like, oh, you don't really pay attention to what's happening outside of it, but then you're like, oh my gosh, that's really happening. So we're sitting at planning, and we get to our second quarter planning, which we're then are now planning for third period, and we get to North Carolina history. And I'm looking through it, kind of getting ahead to see what we're going to talk about as a team, because at that point we were all teaching our own social studies to our homeroom class. Even though I only taught reading and writing, I also taught social studies and science to just my homeroom. So we all still had to plan together. So I'm looking through the curriculum and I'm like, oh, there's been some changes to North Carolina history. So I look back through like, okay, what was taught last year? And it was really just kind of surface level of things that have happened in the South, the Civil War, the women's rights movement, and it now has added in like the Tuscarora War, and then it goes to women's rights, and it goes to civil rights, and it goes to abolition, like all of the things that you want to kind of touch base, because we are in the South, the heart of where a lot of things took place. And so just getting the kids, so we're looking through it, click on it, our instruction map, and go through. And first picture to pop up is the white hoods, right? So I am at the time the only person of color in a classroom. We have one other teacher of color as a specialist, but I am the only in classroom teacher of color. And even then, kids are shocked, like, what? You're not Black, right? You're not Black. So that's their conception most of the time, is that like, there's no way that So I'm like, okay, just so you know, this, right? Get my people crayons out. We're third grade. This is my dad. This is my mom, referring to people crayons.
People
And this
crayons.
is right.
Elementary. I love
And
it.
this is me, because you want to make sure. And they're like, oh, but when that happens, kids who are of color get an aha moment, like, now I can connect. And I know it sounds weird, but then again, my kids went through the school and they were one of 5 kids of color in there because of our location. We're at a magnet school, so it's very different. Um, and so you want to make sure that you're like the ones that are of color, you make sure that they know they're represented as well. So we're flipping through the pictures, right? So you have the white hood pop up. You have another picture pop up of an African American male, Caucasian girl, milk being poured on them. So milk is dripping down their face. You go on again, it's a picture of African Americans being sprayed by fire hoses. You keep going. So there's just all these super graphic pictures. And my colleague instantly is like, I'm not teaching that. Right. So she just instantly is uncomfortable. And my remark is like, this is our history, right? And so by our, I mean, like, I'm not a native of North Carolina, but this is our history for so many of our kids that are stepping in our classroom. And I think what's important for the school, just kind of as a reference of the school that I teach at, the demographic for kids of color is very, very low. So that's on all spectrums from, Asian, Indian, Hispanic, African American. It is very, very small. And in some of those categories, we don't even create a sub pop for it because it's so small.
Okay.
So now that takes into account when we're looking at data, just all the things that it takes into, like, some kids aren't represented simply because there's not enough of them. And so that, again, is another statement where I'm like, okay, we got to look at the kids who are represented in this history, right? Because at the end of the day, both the marginalized ones are represented and the non-marginalized ones, because there is history in that white hood and there is history in that black face with milk being poured on it. So just making sure that we're not afraid. They put it in there for a reason. So there are people who create our curriculum specifically with social studies and science. There are people who work in our county office. So these are approved by them because they clearly think that it's important enough to have these images. So whether or not we choose to display those images to our kids is at the teacher's discretion. And so for me, I was doing a disservice for my students if I didn't show them those images. And that's kind of the approach that I took, whereas other teammates took the complete opposite approach of like, no, we're going to read a book, a kid-friendly book.
What
We're
was,
going
do
to
you know
make
the kid-friendly book?
we're going to make sure that most of them are put into the curriculum. So they are books from like Epic
Gotcha.
that they post. And so they're really just on the topic. A lot of them are nonfiction books. So they'll have pictures of, like, when you do the civil rights, you'll have the meaning behind it, right? It was meant to be, every protest that's rooted in the United States is meant to be nonviolent, and sorry for the insert of the eye roll, but it's always meant and put off that way. And it's just the spin of the politics of it that make it like, oh, they turned it into violence, or they turned it into all the things. There's always the peacefulness behind it. So the books that they chose were definitely appropriate for that age, where you're seeing the good that was meant for what was, why it was named this. Most of the kids are like, what? We were fighting against ourselves. And that's the first time they ever realized that, like, the Civil War was a war against ourselves for these reasons, or when they do, they have an image of the Confederate flag. And so that's, again, biased because, you have these people that say it means this, and then you have this group of people that say it means this. As an African American teacher, or, a mixed race teacher, it's hard for me to agree with what some Southerners will say this Confederate flag means. The way that it's put into our content, it is put in there as a negative, as like this flag represented this, and you can kind of take it for how you want. But a lot of the time that'll be overlooked because, again, they're so young. It's just like they're more shocked about the fact that, like, what, you wouldn't be able to teach me? Because I flat out tell them I wouldn't be your teacher. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Stand up, 1, 2, 3, 4. And this has nothing to do with color. It'll just be like 1, 2, 3, 4. And I count them off. you people standing up, you wouldn't be in our classroom, right? And you don't even draw it to specifically like you girl wouldn't be in here, you boy wouldn't be in here. It's more of the context of like, look at the face next to you, right?
Yeah,
They,
like as a socially
as a,
imposed identity that you
yes,
had no
yes,
control over, but yet it has
correct.
so many material effects, good and bad, depending on how you're positioned in
Yes,
society. Yeah.
correct.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
do think something that I just wanted to highlight of what you said that I think is so important for white teachers to hear, especially teaching, well, white students, is that you said the word hour and then you like helped you like, what do I mean by that hour? And I think that that's important to think about of that interconnectedness of our histories as together in this place that we now
Mhm.
call the United States, and then including the native people as well, because our histories are one. And the only reason we don't consider it and we have these labels in order to understand, like, you know, African American history as something different than what American history is because of the compartmentalization. So the way
Mhm.
that we've been isolated from one another, but all of those that type of segregation can be traced back to legal policy and also discourses of race and racism, right?
Yes.
And so I think that that's important to say, like, Black history isn't for Black people. Black history is United States history, and it's not even a branch of it. It is.
Well,
It
and
is
it's our
that.
historical context, and that's the thing. Before, now fast forward to what I currently teach, I only teach ELA, right? So I only teach reading and writing all day long, but the units of which we have allow me to, the first unit I teach is all about accessing education around the world, accessing books around the world.
Mhm.
And then the most shocking part is when we get to this book called More Than Anything Else. It's a book about Booker T. Washington and his life as, right? So it's, again, a nonfiction book written in terms of a picture book for kids to understand. So you go over the context, the historical context, and that'll be the first time that they hear about it prior to the history of North Carolina, right? Because Booker in Virginia, the mountains of Virginia, right at our border, it's 2.5 hours where I'm from. So where our school is from. So you teach that like this is our backyard, y'all. This is our backyard. And here he cared about something enough. It was hidden from him, so he knew it had to have power. And then you get into the context of like, why would they do that? Right? Why would they withhold something that's so powerful? How did he find this image? Because in the book, he calls him the brown faced man, right? He had to find this brown faced man. And I remember this year actually teaching that book, and just so happened, right, my I kind of keep this open door policy in my classroom, like anybody can walk in at any time and see the best version of myself to my kids. Just so happened to be reading that book that day, discussing it with my class, and in walks our superintendent of Wake County, who he's new this year and he is of color. And we are discussing this. And it was like, you almost ignore it because you don't pay attention because you're just so ingrained in like the questions that you're asking to kind of draw the kids in and to really get out what you wanted. Because the whole purpose is we had this umbrella of a topic. How and what are these people that we're reading about overcoming in order to access the things that are just, these are valuable to us, but they are also something that we deserve to have. And so it was a really full circle moment, and then
Yeah.
afterwards having, your administrator talk to you just about walking into a moment like that in a time that is happening in North Carolina education, it was just a good moment to have those conversations, because everything that we have lends to the books that that we choose.
Yeah.
Some of them are given to us, but then other ones I choose to pick, strategically. I shelve them with interest of, I have these teacher books because another thing that we had to do this year due to law was catalog every book that's in our classroom. Right.
Same
So
in Iowa. That's
thank
my
goodness, because
kids.
I was one who there was no urgency for me at the end of the day. So luckily I had a parent volunteer come and do that, because I kind of feel like if a book has that much power to make you afraid to share it with your child, um, then that's a whole nother conversation for a different day. But I will, strategically place books, you know,
Yeah.
throughout my shelves and throughout my displays that, I think one of the favorite most read books was the 1619 Project, the picture book, right?
Oh, yep, on the
Um,
water. I have
and
this right here.
that
Born on the
was,
water.
yep, born on the, so that was one of the one where the kids were like, what? But all it takes is one kid to pick that book up. And that's the same thing with like when you're teaching, right? All it takes is one kid to just spark something. And because I am at another, I'm at an AIG, GT gifted school.
Okay.
And so that's another thing that's a lot different than a regular public school. Because yes, we are public, but I'm also a magnet for gifted, talented students. And so that is one of the things is just pushing. You push and spark the interest because you're trying to find these kids that are, you know, either identified as gifted or identified as talent development. And that could be in reading, that could be in math, it could be in music, it could be in arts. And so then,
Yeah.
so it's just a lot of different ways to do it.
Yeah, and I think it's important to integrate these historical characters like Carter G. Woodson and like Booker T. Washington, so the kids understand that nothing was given. Like whiteness, white supremacy, and white people didn't wake up one day and say, "Hey, I want to humanize African American people." That this was a hard fought struggle, and it required a collective movement and a collective sort
Mhm.
of worldview in order to get some of these major monumental historical progressive rights to be
Yeah.
materialized. And so yeah, I think that's super important. And then um so let's transition a little bit into what do you think is the problem? You said that you take a totally different approach, and the other teachers in the school, it seems, take, you said opposite approach, but or just different avenue.
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
do you think that is?
Um, some is just set in ways, right, depending on their
Okay.
own perspective, but all of it comes down, I think, personally to their own life experiences. I think their own background of how they were raised, what their beliefs are. We did some professional development, as you all do in classroom teaching, that will take up some of it feels you most of the time the things that feel useless to the people are the ones that need it the most. And so that will open your eyes a lot too to see
Mhm.
like who's eye rolling, who's like, ugh, is this over yet? Right? Why are we doing this? And then you're like, because of you, this is why we're doing this, just so you know this, right? And so it's kind of one of those things is I think sometimes they don't acknowledge it because it's just how it's always been for them. And so it makes it hard to kind of shift the mindset of teaching it or talking about it, right? It makes you a little bit uncomfortable, whether you're talking about civil rights, women's rights, children, anything. It makes people uncomfortable. And I think that's the thing is that it's more of a personal thing because that my approach is, they're 9 years old, right? They don't know the history yet. So
Yeah,
this
well,
is
you
the
said the
enter,
truth. Like, I'm going to
right?
teach the truth.
And so
Yeah,
you're deciding right there, you're kind of setting the stage for them, the things that you're willing to share with them in an honest way versus the things you're willing to hide from them. And if you're willing to hide the information from them, why are you not
right.
willing to share it with them? And I think that's the question that I ask because, I will go and why won't you just say it? Because saying it makes it real. And I
Yep.
think that's the thing is that like we again we aren't putting this in the content is being given to us and that's the thing. And so yeah,
Yeah.
sorry.
So I also hear this did you say sorry again? No. I
Sorry,
also
no, the
hear
phone
this.
was ringing, so
Oh, I didn't even hear it. My bad. I was like, what are you talking about? Okay. So I also hear this discourse of like there's this chilling effect, right? Like there's this fear of teachers to quote unquote break the law with these policies, like you said, with having
Mhm.
to document all the books. And am I going to get in trouble if they catch me teaching this book or whatever that is,
Yeah.
whatever, liberational in any type of way. And so I'm wondering that in that first question, do you think that there is a chilling effect? Do you think that there is a fear? And then, yeah, so I'll start with that question and then I have a
Oh,
thought.
it's a fear for everything, right? So that's even now, right? We're the only state currently without a passed budget, North Carolina, right? So speaking in North Carolina, we are the only state without a passed state budget, meaning
Yeah,
we are
thank you.
currently working off of our 24-25 salary
Off
pay,
of
right?
fees.
Right? So when you
Wow.
think about that and you think about the power in these marches and the different things that teachers will do, it doesn't make an impact because everybody is afraid, right? They're afraid because this is your livelihood,
Hmm.
not thinking, being in it for now almost 14, 15 years. There's a different approach that I took than my first year in the county. It was like, oh my God, I'm a workhorse, right? So everything I do is for that. You're not realizing that, like, in our brains, we trick ourselves to think like we're doing it for the kids, we're doing it for the families, we're doing it when in the end of the day, like, it really does take some sort of insanity to do what we're currently doing, to be in these trenches, because there's some people who are out here just solely working for their livelihood, right? To provide the things that they need to provide for their families. And then there are some who are out here trying to do the hard work, right? They're actually trying to change the system. They're actually trying to care about the rates of which we're not just pushing kids along. We're just not, like, we're truly digging into the data. And so I think the thing is everything, in my opinion, again, it's just my opinion. I do think that everything, at least in the county, um, that I'm in, I think a lot of things are fear, out of fear. I'm going to lose my job. We're
Yeah.
not. Did we see the openings that we have? Oh,
Yep.
we're not. And then if you really look at the things that have changed, like, we're actually on the downhill slide for a lot of things and education in our state. And we don't have to be, like, we don't have to be, but we are.
Yeah. Yeah, so some of the things that I've been thinking about, and because I've seen this a lot too, and it's almost like this like white teacher move to innocence, almost like, well, I swear I'm woke, but
Mhm.
I'm not willing to actually sacrifice anything or even risk in the most minor way. Yet at the same time, they allow you to carry the whole entire burden, also as the one teacher of color at your school.
Yeah. Now
Um,
there's more. There is more now. That's the nice thing about it.
And even then, why again, like why I guess like what I'm struggling with is why even if there's a couple more teachers of color at your school, why is that burden expected to always be placed on those teachers?
Yes,
When
it's a
they're
good
already
question.
dealing with racism in education and in society and already are risking their lives by walking outside. Um,
Yes.
how do you, I don't want to like, yeah,
No,
that's
it's
kind of
a
what I'm
it's a good
struggling with.
that's yeah, that's a good question because I can't always fully answer that. Again, I think with honesty answering it, I will say that, like, for me, I am in an interesting situation simply because of the school and the area of which I teach in. So it makes it hard because if I go down the street and around the corner to the other school, they're experiencing more so the things that, we're having this conversation about. Um, so for me, it's difficult to talk about it because I choose to stay where I'm at for a purpose, right? And I know, again, that sounds really, really crappy to say, to be like, oh, I'm an advocate for, public education and students, whether, especially the marginalized, that was one of my PDP goals. Like, why aren't we moving these certain subgroups? Why aren't we moving these certain, gender, this things like that? And so a lot of my work this year and every year, but specifically this year, like, drawing the attention to, like, who am I moving? How am I moving them? Which direction am I moving them? I think that gets to be the question for a lot of us, is like, sometimes we're put in, at least in the district that we're in what feels like impossible situations because we can't control the redistricting of schools. Um, I send, my children to schools for a reason, the schools that they go to. Um, and that reason is solely because I know that the teachers there um, are there for this same reason. That school historically is in neighborhoods that the kids that do come in and are bused for that it's a small population of students that have a history of coming from, sometimes they're redistricted to the schools that they are because it's just the way the maps were drawn. And some they come in with a lot of, and I will say, the principal that I have now, one of my favorite things she ever said is like them coming, they're our kids now, right? So like when we go to look at data, we'll be like, oh, those kids from there, because we, a couple of years ago, we had a huge shift of kids that came in from this specific school and it was rough. And it had
And
been
quick
like that.
question,
Yeah.
just for context. This redistricting is happening in kind of like a busing type of integration type of thing. Okay,
Yes.
okay, just making
Yes.
okay. And
Yeah.
when did
And
the redistrict happen?
so
Sorry.
it happens all the time,
Oh,
right?
they
So
always are shifting it.
it's
Okay,
always
okay.
shifting. So
That's a
like
little different from
here's an
Waterloo. Like I
example
know
of
they, yeah.
like, okay, so we live when we bought our house, we bought it very close to downtown Raleigh. Um, a lot of the schools in the area are, top performing schools, high graduation rates, the programs. I specifically wanted my kids in magnet schools. So I wanted them in application schools, not necessarily the schools that are just, it's so large. Like where we come from, you live here, you go to this school, right? That is not the case here. So like I live in downtown Raleigh. My home base school is 45 minutes on a bus for my
Yeah.
kids,
But they're
right?
trying it. You know they're trying it here in Iowa.
And
It's
so,
happening. It's
yeah.
happening.
And so
Yeah.
that's the thing that you have to think about too, is it's like, so then I ask, I'm like, man, I bought this, right? Got this house, got it for this area. So then it would be easier for my kids to get magnet status in these schools to, even if I didn't teach in the magnet school that I teach in, it would just be an easier process for them. Because at the end of the day, like when you choose homes, when you choose areas, and then you have children, you want them to go to the best of the best. You want them to be offered that, to give them something to look forward to surround them with greatness of everything, right? My kids have a very privileged life, I will say so. They don't always see it now, but the things that they're exposed to from the people that they have in their lives, to the friends and the occupations that their friends' parents have, that we didn't grow up seeing those things. I'm not I'm not being dropped off at $2 million homes. My kid is, right? And that's being realistic. And so that's the reality of kind of like what I'm trying to provide for them, is that like you can have all these opportunities right here, you know um and they're just waiting for you to take. And so that's, for us, our district being redistricted, and then asking, at the time, my principal at the time, and I was like, what happened? Like, how did I end up going all the way out here from the house that I just bought? Like, I bought it for, you buy properties for a reason. So he goes, and it's because there wasn't enough. That area has grown so much, with Raleigh growing the way that it is and all of the cities around it growing in Wake County. There's not enough representation of kids of color out there. There's not. And so what happens is, the neighborhood I did buy my house in is a high population. The zip code happens to be a high population of people of color. And so the easiest way to do that is now to rezone it, so the kids in this neighborhood are now being bused to the schools in order to give it diversity, which, it's a good thing. But it also is like, now we would have to go, if I wasn't teaching at the schools and able to apply to magnet status the way that I can, my child now has to get on a bus, go 45 minutes out of their way, when we have a perfectly good school 1.8 miles away.
Yeah, and it breaks up the
So
local communities
it does.
and that community that the
Yes.
school kind of embodies too. And then also something that I found interesting of what you just said is in this zip code that is black and brown
Hmm.
inhabited zip code, those are the people that are getting bused rather than the white people in the white zip code getting bused into the black neighborhoods.
Interesting though. So my neighborhood that we live in, to kind of reverse what that is
Okay.
my oldest daughter went to the first historically black magnet school,
Okay.
right? Which is
Because of this
because
redistricting.
of this. So
Oh, okay,
because
that
of
is interesting. Okay,
so
that
she
sounds
the school that she went to was a traditionally a high school. And what happened was, when magnet schools hit the scene, um, they were being offered, obviously, in the year of which this was happening, segregation in the South was still in full swing. And in order to create opportunities for African American students, again, all this happens right downtown in what they call the old historic Oakwood area,
okay.
or Raleigh area. And so, which is just downtown Raleigh, basically. Um, and that is how the school that she went to for middle school was originally started. It started as the high school for kids of color, to be able to go and take these top, right? You want to be an engineer, you want to, and like, so the schools that she has attended from elementary all the way now, she'll graduate next year, have a very high population of kids of color because the school's location is in the first gentrified neighborhood
Wow. The
in all
complexities
of,
of that.
yes.
So it's like they
So,
redistrict them to put them in a
mhm.
newly white zip code, but it also
And so
formally has this
now you have
legacy.
kids who
Yeah.
are bused from the airport to come to that school because of the not the history, but the outcome of what happened
Yep.
in that school.
Exactly.
So it is historically a very high achieving academic school, very prestigious school, and then it feeds into a very prestigious high school, which is, just right down the block from it. And so it's very interesting to see that because you have the neighborhood kids are no longer the non-kids of color because they're the ones who still live in that neighborhood. And so that is now their neighborhood school, and it kind of has the reverse effect because kids are now getting bussed in that are not of color. And you have that population of people who are being bussed in from 20 minutes, 45 minutes away to get to this school because of its high achieving academics that it has. Yeah. So it's kind of like it's cool to have that and to learn that history because at first I was like, oh, this is pretty cool, but it's interesting because then the reverse thing happens in some other schools where it's like, okay, now we have to bus these kids from this part to here in order to make it so that it keeps your magnet status or so that this school keeps this,
Okay.
this merit and has this ratio of kids. And I don't really know how they rezone and remap or why they choose what they choose because it's like
Because
I could
magnet
live
status is based off of a variety of criteria
a
or
bunch of, yeah, so certain
right.
schools you can only apply within your zoned district, where your district or your address zones to. So it's like I might have the best magnet school right across the street from me, but I can't go to it. So it does have some limits on it, and occasionally they'll open it up, and anybody will be able to apply and all of it. But it's very interesting. There's a lot of history just even within Wake County of, now there's a big article going around of like, are Wake County public schools more segregated than in the 1950s? And to read the comments on them is very interesting because you'll have, I'm a teacher, I have kids that have gone through this system, and I will absolutely say, like I said, I can speak for it, with my girls being one of 5 total kids of color in their cohort of, I am at a smaller school for the city to be so large. They only had 65 kids in their class for elementary, total between the classrooms. So it's interesting to be like, oh, that's not bad, but you're looking at you're
One building. Yeah.
one building and there's only 5 people who look
Already
like
say, I mean,
her,
that's the
right? Who look like her.
segregation.
And so it's interesting because, you don't
It's
really,
interesting
there's
how
no way to reverse it. There's
yeah,
there's
like
no way
all
to
these
reverse it.
redistricting, like it's like
Yeah.
such, it seems so ridiculous or like silly to continue to do this
Hmm.
redistricting thing, which
Yeah.
takes money and it takes resources and time. And we're paying somebody in the government a wage to do these things. And
Except
it's
for right now, we're not because there's no budget passed to pay.
right,
So.
right, except for the budget right now. But at the same time, so there's like some sort of, so-called intention there, but then the
Yeah.
impact it's not that's where we're falling short. Well, not we, but in this case, Raleigh,
Yeah.
falls a little bit short.
Yeah.
Despite these quote unquote efforts to integrate, and then even the larger argument of like, did integration actually do anything for the education of African American children or children of color overall? Because the numbers, there's no evidence of that in any
Yeah.
measurement
And
at
that
all.
determines too who's going into the classrooms, right? Because you'll have teachers who will ask, "What do you think of this school? What's the scoop on this one?" What's instead of just like,
Interesting.
"Hey, I'm applying for this 5th grade job because I really love 5th grade," right? Or I really love the craft of teaching, or I really love the content of blah blah blah. Instead of going into it with that, they're going into it with like, "What are the demographics?"
Yep.
Right? Who am I going to be teaching? How hard is it? Are behaviors an issue? Or, it's just a shift in mindset. And so it's like,
Yeah, and it's like
It's
also
tough.
interesting how all of these, I mean, it happened differently in different states, but we know on a federal level in the law, it happened in what, 1954, Brown versus Board.
Hmm.
Um, Yet still in the United States, I think the statistic is like 80% of African American children are in 10% of the districts, and those districts are still located in urban city type communities. And so, even like that argument for, yeah, we do have some sort of integration, but statistically in the United States, there's also very little evidence of actual integration even happening on a physical level. But then, if you talk about in the building, with tracking and the disproportionate numbers of students of color with IEPs,
Hmm.
etc. Um, it makes you also just question the fight for integration. And in fact, in historically, the people who were fighting for educational rights for African Americans, they never were fighting for integration. That was something that like the white people did in government were like, oh yeah, we can
Yeah.
integrate, but they were asking for like a type of equality, right? So they wanted resources, they wanted
Yeah.
money, they
Yeah.
wanted funding, but they did not want to dismantle the schools that they had built off of their hard work and effort, very little pay, but they had this dream and this vision to educate their community
Mhm.
from their perspective.
Just having adequate resources, right? So that was it.
Right.
That was the big push is having, you don't want to, you're at a disadvantage if I'm in ninth grade, but I'm using a seventh grade textbook.
Yeah.
I mean,
Or
let's
even
be
old books.
serious,
Girl, remember even
right?
in Waterloo, we had West High stamped books
Stamped
at
books
East
at
High.
East High.
Same
Yes.
same district.
So I think that's and that's the thing too, is that you have to think about the history of that too, is like what you just said.
Yeah.
It's like everything gets shifted, everything gets,
Yeah. And how
everything gets shifted, and it all is contextual. It's all the view of the person higher up making the choices, the person in power, whoever's in power at whatever level of power they have, who's
yeah.
making decisions that, or one radical decision is made, and it's yeah, it really does come down to that. Is like there's like a misunderstanding of what is truly needed, and I think or
Mhm.
desired, because even now, like when you think about, you know all the things where you're like, oh, it's I was just recently listening to, um I can't remember who I was listening to, so it doesn't even matter. But I was listening to him, and he's a professor at HBCU,
Mhm.
and here in Raleigh specifically, like we are just surrounded by some of the greatest institutions that people, they'll auction off their house to send their kids to these schools, because it is a plethora of choices for colleges, right? And surrounding us is a ton of HBCUs. And for our oldest who's looking, right, that's I'm like, I really want you, like we got to go tour some, right? And that's just my own selfishness of like never even being, I was going to fill out the application to Spelman, right? Knowing nothing about it. I wasn't taking a visit there. I wasn't doing it. Was more of just like, oh, I can be the first to do this or like that, and you don't think about it. But he said the misconception of with HBCUs is kids coming there, and then it's like for me, I'm like, I want you to not finally not be the only one, right? Because even in her AP classes, yes, she has kids of color, but they are not African American females. um and so for her, I'm like, well, you can go and be, right? But he says the biggest thing that students of color need to realize is that there's no black excellence, there's just excellence, right? And it's all the conception of like we keep tricking ourselves into thinking that like when someone says, oh, it's black this or it's white this, or it's like it's excellence regardless of what is on it. And like that was so meaningful, because now you're just going to be surrounded by people who are having that mindset of excellence, regardless of they're not walking into a classroom where race is the first thing that they're thinking of, because 100% honesty, that's the first thing that's talked about a lot of the times. I was one of the only people of color, and again, people will question my color at all times in my college of ed program, right? Or when you're asked the question of when did you have your first African American teacher? How about never?
Yeah.
Right? Or things like that, where it's just like, why is that happening?
Yeah, and even that, thinking historically about, why didn't we have African American teachers? Well, because of integration, right? That dismantled
Yeah.
the community schools, and it took a lot of Black teachers out of teaching field
Yep.
and replaced them with white teachers. And so I think dealing again, so just as a little reminder for this podcast, I'm like the audience I'm targeting are white teachers, so that's why I keep bringing
Hmm.
it up. Um,
Yeah.
so I think that because I think that being a teacher for so long, I notice these discourses and how they get circulated and how they gain power, but it's still all bullshit and it's still all complicity and it's still all to perpetuate that comfort that white teachers feel that they're actually doing something, right?
Yeah.
Like there's some sort of like charity sense to it, right? Or some sort of like
Yep.
saviorism, like I'm single-handedly pulling up these people. And so dealing with that history of dismantling those schools with such a rich tradition, a historical tradition
Hmm.
centered in the Black experience in the United States, like dealing with that guilt and that complicity of white America in all of those under the narrative of like progression.
Hmm.
um I think that we as white teachers need to do a much better job with grappling with explicitly, not only just in our heads, but
Hmm.
like out loud, not only in communities with each other, but also directly with our students, teaching this
Yeah.
history, teaching this truth, and teaching it as white complicity. And having students, how do you, we can debate this. This can be a dialectical conversation. We can think of all angles. We can go with all types of debate, but we definitely can't silence that piece of it so people just think like, oh, well, this is just the way it is and we can make it better. It's like, no, this is actually manufactured and socially constructed to be the way it is now.
Yeah. And
um
I think that is just, I mean, that's everything is acknowledging it. And that's the first thing of like, if when we go in, on one of our professional developments we had recently, that was the thing is we're getting ready to have an uncomfortable conversation, right? And it's being honest that like, there's so many things that are uncomfortable currently that have always been uncomfortable, right? That
yeah,
have never been things people enjoyed or wanted to talk
yeah,
about. But if that was the case, we wouldn't be having the conversations. And so it's like, it's the same thing that teachers have to take that approach with kids, regardless of the age, right? We're going to talk about things. If I'm a kinder teacher, we're going to talk about some things that are going to be a little surprising, right? Or you're going to teach a high school, or we're about to talk about some things that might directly impact you that you may have experienced firsthand. And I think that's the thing. So whether it's you pulling out your people crayons or you, like you said, asking someone for real life experience to add to the conversation. And that's the thing is that it's like, I think there's sometimes the conception that we all think the same if we're all this color. We all feel the
that's
same if
yeah,
we're all this, and it's not the case. So like when you and I were having the conversation about something that happened to my own child in school, when she has a teacher who's not her classroom teacher coming in because their job in the county and that specific school is to do whatever. I still don't know the title of the teacher or what she's supposed to be doing, and doesn't give context to what she's actually doing, hands out, slips of paper, tells the kids they're going to be talking about race and racism. Totally different thing. Those are two totally different. Anywho, tells them, this is, and the kids are just like, whatever, right? So again, she goes to a school, North Raleigh. In my eyes, it's a lot more diverse than what I thought it was when I was like, oh gosh, one of my daughters in middle school is going to this historically, prestige middle school that, embraced kids of color, and now I'm sending my child to this school in North Raleigh. Just all the things, right? But it was again my own misconception of not fully looking at all the kids who attended there, seeing their background, seeing their, so she's in class, just happens to be in a class where it's only her and two other kids of color, her and another African American girl and a Hispanic girl. All the rest of the kids in there are not of color and mostly male. And so the teachers
and this is
this
seventh
is
grade,
seventh
right?
middle school, yep. So puts them into pairs and she pairs them up. It's not like go pick a partner type of thing. It's I'm going to pair you up. So she happens to get paired with the Hispanic girl, and then the other African American girl gets paired with a white male. Teacher tells them she's going to pass them this QR code out there to scan it and make observations on this video clip that they have. So the video clips all happen to be like commercials the kids have no context of these commercials. They don't know what they have to do with anything. So that's the number one thing is you didn't try to build any sort of connection so that they could have some sort of innovative thinking about what's happening, right? Because we want to build and then we want to make these connections to start putting fireworks go off. So then you can think of, well, how could I add this, this experience to my own, whatever the case is. So my child and her partner scan the thing. The video like pops up and it's at the time she doesn't even know that it's like a Pepsi commercial, but it's the controversial, Pepsi commercial of the Jenner Kardashian, whatever, handing the officers the Pepsi. But like everything's cut out. If you look, that video was only on air for a short amount of time. Yes, it will always live on the internet. And I didn't even fully like go look it up again because I've watched it. I watched it when it first came out and I was like, Lord have mercy, like not right now. This is not being released. And at the time there was so much going on in the world that you were just like, this is
How do you,
not, how do you even release a video like this with everything going on?
right, right.
And so my kid, her and the partner watch it. The teacher filters around the room and is like, what are your thoughts, or like, what do you notice? I think was the language that was shared. What do you notice? And they're like, I don't know, some officers being handed a Pepsi. Like there's literally nothing. So they at this point, and so the teacher then almost like reprimands because here you have this child of color and another child of color together, and she's like, so you don't, and questions, and they're like not fully understanding what it's about because the whole clip it was only a small clip of the commercial. It wasn't like you got to see the full commercial,
Mhm.
nor did you know the previous context of why Pepsi decided to release that commercial at that time, the
Or even
year,
how to
right?
analyze
What
those
let
things.
right? And so, and it was like that with all of these, another commercial, but was about like women's rights, like so easy a woman could do it or something like that. And so it was like a Dr. Pepper commercial. But to go back to my daughter's one, the teacher then like looks my daughter square in the face and was like, so you don't know about the BLM? And my daughter's like, what? Right. So when all this is happening, she's little. She has no idea what any of this. And it's not something that simply because we're a Black household, we should have to teach that at that time. It's one of those things when appropriate and when we feel it's necessary to talk about these topics with her, or that we even necessarily agree with certain things that you think are things that you should teach about racism or race, whatever, however she worded it. And my child was like devastated because it was this expectation of, because she is Black, she was expected to know about this movement that she was like, how was I supposed to know that it, all the things. And it was very much so like, of course, that prompts me to be like, oh, no, 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 that's not what you do. Like you definitely have chosen the wrong child of color to have this to, and one who will advocate and educate you on things. So I gladly like sent, you know,
I gladly. That's right.
just very professionally from my work
Yeah.
email, being a Wake County teacher. I just sent a nice little email with some attachments to it of just like, you should educate yourself about
Yeah.
some things before you just go ahead and do this and slap the label of I'm teaching about race or I'm talking about racism, or it's more like check, um
Or
you
there's
know
some like sort
and
of
like what intent. Yeah.
biological correlation to activism and being an African American student. Like again, and that's
Yeah.
like giving a eugenics type of thing. Or
Hmm.
even if you want to go a little bit further to like 60s, that like cultural like
Hmm.
expectation according to like the white gaze of who African American people are as a monolith and as like by default supposed to be also activist
Yeah.
um again, and that also it still is normalizing white as
Hmm.
not a race almost.
Yeah.
And also like how do I want to say normalizing that like larger discourse of everything that again according to white perception is that African Americans are constantly thinking about the white racism or white supremacy, because if you think about Black Lives Matter movement, that was a resistance movement for police brutality that is
Mhm.
imposed by a white supremacist policing institution. And so so then the assumption, without whether this was conscious or not, is that um that like you because of your identity and because of all of these things, have to be thinking about your oppression
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
that white people impose on you, but at the same time acting like you're more woke than the African American
Correct.
12-year-old in your classroom. Like, how could
Correct.
you not know about it? I'm this like woke white lady, and
Yeah.
I maybe overuse the word woke because I do have some sort of respect for like what the woke movement is. I just hate how it gets co-opted by certain people,
Hmm.
mostly white is what I see. But again, that could be just my observation
Yeah.
thinking about the audience of this podcast. But like, saying like woke, but not revel, like it's like fake. It's like you're not, again, you're willing to maybe act like it, but
And I
it's
think
still a
it
career
depends
for
on
you.
the age too. And I'll say that
The age
lightly.
of the teacher.
Of the yes, because I will say,
Okay.
like, I have some colleagues who it's natural for them, right? If you think of like my oldest niece, her age, that's the age of like my colleague, um, 25, 27 years old. And I will say like that authenticness of like who she is as a white female and the genuine I have not experienced it fully in my teaching yet the way that I have with her and like a couple of my other colleagues who are of that same age
And
when
what do you
dealing
think
with
it
it.
is? Like
I don't know because I
like a
like
concrete example of where like, oh,
so like
somebody
I
wants to
always try
tell
to
you
give her
something.
flowers because it's like there's different things where when her and I are having conversations, you're just like you you get like there's something that she gets that it's just like there are people my age that don't get, and God forbid, way older teachers at our school that I don't think will ever get it before they retire. But it's just like an authenticness behind the willingness to kind of, it's wanting to know, right? It's wanting to know what's happening with the kids who are not the norm of the building that we teach in. And by
Or
norm,
don't
I
have the
mean like they're
same
not the kids
experience.
who are living in the neighborhood. They are the kids who come in with, and sometimes they're the kids who are not of color who are still being bussed in because guess what? That's where their family can afford to live,
Mhm.
right? And so it's the willingness to for me when her and I have conversations, it's there's not a like I'm right or I'm trying to have power. There's no, you have some teachers who are in the classroom for power. I'm sorry, I win every time. Why? Because I pay taxes, right? I wake up and work for my bills. You are just attending the classroom that I currently possess so that I can try to educate you for a better life in this world, right? And so for her, there's no winning out of it. It's she's a relational person, and most of the people in the school that I teach that are at that age, that's what I notice so much about them and that I love the most because I too am a relational person. But you'll see these connections with kids that are like the hard kids, right? Or they go and you'll have some teachers who are like, oh, I can't stand, right? Can't stand that kid. Why that? But these are the teachers, a few of them in the school who just grasp on to those kids authentically. It's not like, oh, I feel bad for them, so I need to just make sure that I protect them and keep them under my wing. They have honest conversations, right? We're having lunch together. I'm not having lunch because I like you. I'm having lunch because this happened and I need to make sure you understand that that won't happen again. Right. So it's more of like building that
Yep.
relationship. And I think that's the thing is they build the relationships to understand the kid
And maintaining that
and
academic
not just
rigor.
like, oh, they have a hard life. Or did you talk to their
Yeah, they're hard.
parents? Right. When it comes from, did you talk to their parents? Did you know that blah, blah, blah? Because also, one thing that's interesting, we never know kids who are free and reduced lunch. We don't know when kids are displaced. We don't know when kids have anything unless you build the relationship that the family feels comfortable enough to share it with us. We don't ever know. By law, we can't. I can't go to the front and say which kids which parents do I need to reach out to that I know, we can't do things like that, right? So it's just like I think for them, and I can't speak for them, but from what I see, it's the real authentic relationships of just like who they are and like genuinely caring about people. It's like a selflessness to it, like knowing that like they know that they're privileged, right? They know that their skin alone gives them privilege. And so we can sit here and listen or read online or whatever, where it's like, you'll have a person not of color like, please tell me, how am I privileged, right? I ate ramen noodles and corn from the time I was 6 years old until, but you still have an advantage simply because, right? And so when we're teaching staff that you already have an advantage simply because your skin does not have any melanin in it. Okay. You
And
win by default.
would you say that these teachers are willing to take more risks?
Yes, yes, I will say yes.
Okay.
Because there's not, like a couple of them are like, I'm not in this for the long haul, right? They felt like, for me, I'm like, well, dang, I've already invested this much time. I got to stay in for retirement. There's a sense of like, if this is not my calling, like their roots aren't fully like put into education or into a classroom, like they know that there's a great big world out there, that they're not so stuck, right? And they're not so set in their ways, and they're not, so there's just a difference. And we can't say that for all people that are of
Of
that age,
course.
because
Yeah, of course
clearly
not.
we see some
We're just trying to
pretty
figure, so we're just trying to make
self
patterns
right.
recognition. Yeah.
But I will say, again, and again, I come from a very different public school, being Magnet, but being where we're located, most people are like, oh, but it's not, it's just not your typical, like, what the county doesn't do for us. Parents are willing to step in, right? They fund positions. We need intervention because we have this many kids who can't read, right? This many kids who aren't passing. What do we need to do? We need another intervention position. All right, families will step in and pay for things like that because we're fortunate enough to have it. And you can't be anything but grateful for something like that, because again, like I said, I have 3 kids that go through that, who are going through this system, and those are the kind of schools and the kind of people that I want my kids stepping in front of. But I also want to make them aware of the teachers who are not there for them, or who may not have the same agenda that should be for them, right? Which is to grow them as a person first and then a learner. And I think that that's important for them to know as
Yeah.
children of color, in at least coming from our standpoint in our house.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
Well, yeah, I think that's a little good positive note to end on, as far as
yeah.
like this has been socially constructed, and there is room to, we like white teachers, we can do better.
Yeah.
There are people doing better, and I have an inkling of an idea that if we ask these teachers, like, what is it in your lived experiences that kind of provokes you to want to be this type of
Hmm.
teacher that wants to center the knowledges of people of color, the legacies of people of color in this country, and even this, the Americas writ large. And I'm just trying to figure out, like, what is it about those teachers that other teachers can use as a model, or teacher educators can be more explicit about when we're preparing pre-service teachers, and kind of grappling with like these disproportionalities even in the races of teachers. Like, Iowa, I think, is like 97% white teachers.
Yeah.
80% nationwide are white and female, which again doesn't represent the demographics of the United States, which
Yeah.
is, about 50% or a little bit higher than 50% white, and,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then the other, and then, so yeah. So I think that's a good positive note. Like, there is room. It's not like,
It does start in the institutions, though, and that's the thing, is you have to be willing to have.
and
When when I was in grad school, that was like my most impactful. And she's not currently in the classroom right now as a professor, but one of the biggest things that it was my first semester, and one, it was, kids are impressionable and they need representation, right? And those are the 2 things. And it's, well, how do you do that, right? All stakeholders have to be involved. So that means, right, when I teaching, right, we read Peter Pan. Okay. People would look at Peter Pan and they're like, oh, Tinkerbell, like all the things, until you have to teach these 3rd graders about the historical context of Peter Pan, the author, J.M. Barrie, who wrote it, right? Here he is, this man so it's just things like that. And the language that's used in the book,
I was
why
screaming.
why white males are perceived this way, right? Why is the white female perceived this way? Why do they call them Indians? right? And then the kids are like, every time they come across it in the book when we're doing the read aloud, and they're like, Miss, how you're offending them. I'm like, no, no, no. We're reading the text, and we are, we learned about now you don't go up to someone with a red stripe on your face and a feather in your hair, and right. So we learn about why it's like this. Well, we learned that people from where he was from, they would go over, right, on a boat because who could afford to take a boat? White wealthy men. They would go over and they would see these people of color. They would get them to write just all the things, and then they took these notes back to them, and so that's how they're able to perceive people
Yeah.
this way. So when the author writes, he didn't write with ill intent. He wrote about how he was educated on that group of people, and it's the same thing of what we have to do now. We just have to decide, what are we willing to learn about people groups, about people,
Yeah.
about
And
concepts,
be willing
about,
to listen,
and
really
be
be just
willing to
shut up,
listen.
like
And
stop
yeah, and
talking. Yeah.
so I think that's a big thing now, is like when you're in that seat of being able to educate teachers who will go in, because again, you look at it now, the average teacher graduating is making it 3 to 5 years, right? That's average. So all of our teacher prep programs, it's like you are staying in a classroom shorter than what it took you to get that degree. Why? Because we're not preparing them for things like this, that, it's changing. Education was started as an institution to prepare people to work 9 to 5 jobs. And now we're trying to prepare them to create 9 to 5 jobs, right? We're trying to prepare them
Create
to do
whatever they
those.
think is best for everybody. Like
Yes.
that's what I want our kids, our students to know
Yeah.
is like you guys have that power.
Yeah.
You just need to learn how to use that because there's these people with like real
Yeah.
power, very, very small amount of people
Yeah. But
that
they possess it. They
that
possess
are
it, and we have
constantly
to.
trying to make sure that you guys don't know how powerful you really are
Yeah. So I
by
think
all
it
of the
is a
things
shift
that
with
we are
with,
talking about.
like you said, the I didn't know that the statistic was that high for how um many teachers are female, Caucasian educators doing that. So but it's interesting. I think that's really what it comes down to, is I think it's gonna have to fall in teacher prep programs. I think it's gonna have to fall in administration, knowing the
Yeah.
demographics of the kids in their
And yeah,
school
and
and
white
the
people
teachers
realize that
that they're hiring,
they have to
you
move
know,
over. You have to,
yeah,
you have to move over. Like,
give space, yeah,
yes.
because yeah, for sure,
Yes.
for sure.
Yes. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining
Thank
me. Officially my
you.
first guest. I'm so excited about this, and I think the conversation went really well.
Yes.
So any last thoughts or final words or any kind of message you want to give to teachers or
Man, keep fighting the good fight, really, when it comes down to it. Stay in the trenches. Nobody else is going to.
yeah,
So somebody's got to do it, and somebody will eventually, somebody will make a difference. So it could be any one of us, honestly. So be impressionable and do it with intent. Yeah, for sure.
all right. Well, thank you. It was nice to
Yes.
have you.
Bye, girl.
Bye bye.